Goodness, there are a lot of you.
Ai, un segon, que em poso la traducció al català.
Let me turn on this translation service here. Yeah, off we go. Hello, hello, and welcome. Wow, amazing. So many of you. So happy to see so many of you interested in Ursula. There are other worlds, but they are all here in the 42 at the 42. And today we're very lucky to dig into Ursula's world. She's a world-known author with a lot of awards on her hands, with the Nebula, the Locus, and here in Catalonia she has been awarded the llibreter. She's also a finalist for the Jova in IDECAT. Welcome, Ursula. It's an honor, an immense pleasure to have you here and to, well, have the opportunity to talk about your work. I'm very nervous because I'm a fan of her. I brought all her books, so she's going to be busy signing dedications. I'm going to start with a question that I am sure you've been asked before. In fact, I know that a group of children you met the other day asked you about your name, the reason why you chose Kingfisher. Tell us a little bit more about where it comes from. Thank you.
Oh, absolutely. And first of all, thank you for having me here. It is a delight to be at Festival 42. I have met so many lovely people, and please don't be nervous. I very rarely attack unprovoked. So, yes, I chose the name T. Kingfisher because I was writing lots of books for children, and that was fine and great. And then I started writing books for adults, and I hadn't really thought about a pen name, and then I was at a library event that had somehow gotten a hold of one of those books, despite it being a very obscure small press that had put it out. And they put it in a raffle, and a small child won it. And I thought, oh my God, that is the book with the torture and the sex scenes. And did the slow motion, no, and thought, I gotta get a pen name. This is not a good idea. So kingfishers are my favorite bird. I believe they're called blauet in Catalan, and I picked them because it was fun. It was a little silly, and I like the way they fly, like they're about to fall out of the air at any moment.
Molt bé.
Thank you very much. So, to all these young people who perhaps have not yet dared reading fantasy, how would you convince them? Because I have students in my library who are not fantasy readers. Help me bring them on board.
It's so strange to me that there are children who don't want to read fantasy. When I was young, you know, if it had a dragon on the cover, I would throw myself on it. I would find out what other media they like. If there are TV shows with that are fantasy that they like, and I know there's many, or cartoons or manga. Just say it's like that, only a book, and it has dragons and explosions and very cool things, and you might enjoy it. That's about all I got. I just write the books. I don't know how to convince people to read them.
Well, librarians' job is to convince reader. Why do you think it is important to read fantasy? What does it bring us?
I believe G.K. Chesterton, who is a British author, said that, and I am quoting him very badly, that the important things about books with monsters is not that they convince children monsters are real, but they show that monsters can be slain. And it's important for children to know that even when there are very large and terrible things that they are up against, there are ways to win. But what child wants to read about economic uncertainty or terrible real-world plights? It's much easier and safer and more digestible to read about dragons and monsters and learn that you can triumph over terrible adversity. And also, dragons are just cool.
That's a good argument. So oftentimes I've seen your work, especially, well, I thought once that your work is feminist work, but while reading other of your books, this is the last one, by the way, published by Indomita, the latest one, Illuminations. This speaks about art, trust, collaboration, mutual support. But, well, reading your work, I have the impression that you aim at speaking about power also, power relationships, oppression, social struggle. So if you want to speak about this, of course, you need to include women's oppression. Am I right? Is it an intentional message? Is it an organic topic in your work? Are you interested in all these topics I mentioned?
Well, yes, I am interested in all of them because I am a person alive in the world, and these things, have terrible power over all of us. I'm sure you all know now how the elections turned out in my country, and they wonder why we want to escape to fantasy sometimes. Yeah, these are all important things. I don't necessarily set out to write a book and think I will write a feminist novel, but if you write about women who are trying to take back power, you have written one. And so I think many of these things work better when they arise organically in the course of writing the book. At least for me, there are probably authors out there who have a checkbox and are like, yes, I will write about social justice and mutual aid and this, and then sit out and write a book like that. And I am very impressed and would love to meet them. I just start somewhere and think about what are my characters going to be struggling against, what powers will oppress them, and sometimes it is as simple as dragons, but a lot of times it is misogyny and poverty and things that keep you down when you need to rise above.
Yeah, we'll go back to the characters later because I'm very interested in speaking about characters indeed. So, speaking about how you build your novels, what comes first in your process? Characters, the topic, the plot? What comes first? What is your, let's say, starting point? Is it characters and then you start thinking of the plot? Is it a mix of everything?
I think it's usually characters come first, but sometimes I will have a very nebulous sort of idea, like what is the most useless magical power I can think of? And I thought, okay, being able to control bread would be very useless. And then when I had that idea, I started thinking about the character who would have that power. And of course, to be a good book, she would have to find ways to use this power very, very dramatically. And part of this came about because I used to watch lots of cartoons. They come on Saturday mornings in the US, I don't know about here. And I would watch the cartoons with superheroes, and they would have all of these powers, and I would be sitting there going, but if you just did this one thing with that power, you could kill the villain right now. This is a terrible problem for me watching superhero movies. I still sit there and I'm like, but why don't you just do this? If you can control water, why don't you just turn all of the water in his body to ice and cut the next 2 hours out of the movie? I would also have sent the eagles into Mordor with the ring. So I come up with an idea, and then I start thinking about the character who has this idea. And of course, if you work with bread, you would want to be in a bakery. That would be the best place. And I was trying to write a book for children, so I thought, she'll be, younger. And then I just start writing, and of course there has to be a plot, so bad things have to happen that allow her to overcome things. And since I didn't quite know what to do first, I thought I would start with a dead body, because that's very dramatic, and you have to address it right away. You can't just pretend there's not a dead body on the floor. And so it kind of goes like that. I do not plan my books out very in advance terribly well. Sometimes I go along and I'm like, I feel stuck. All right, they fall in a pit or ninjas attack, and I can go from there.
Ursula, how did the idea in this book about this radish with teeth? Radish, sorry, with teeth. Why a radish?
I was an illustrator for a long time, and at some point, for reasons I am not entirely clear on, I started drawing vegetables that looked like animals. So I had mammoth garlic that had big tusks and things like that. And I was drawing radishes, and if you draw them the right way, the end looks like a little nose, and I would and the big leaf is a tail, and so I would make these weird little like birds or animals that looked like radishes. And when I was writing the book years later, I was like, that was a lot of fun. I'm going to write about that. When I started the book, I did not realize that radishes would be so important towards the end. And if you haven't read the book, you probably think it's completely insane now, because I am talking about how radishes save the day, but I promise it makes sense if you actually read the whole book.
Molt bé.
Let me go back to the topic of the radish and so many other topics we could raise about your book. Now, your approach on fantasy, one specificity is that you use a great deal of sense of humor, which is cross-cutting, and it goes from the beginning to the end. But you also speak about very dark and hard topics. Is it difficult to find the right balance between humor and seriousness and darkness?
Surprisingly not. I very rarely, it's more instinctive, I want to say. People who are in terrible situations make jokes. There are lots of I don't know if the show MASH got out here or not, but people in terrible war zones and hospitals and things, they crack jokes all the time, because you have to laugh or you start screaming, and then you don't know if you'll stop. So when I'm writing about people in dark or scary situations, I know they're going to make jokes. I would make jokes. I will be hilarious for the next 4 years in America, believe me. It's easy to connect the two, and also if something is horror and darkness, it's like a screw. You wind it tighter and tighter, and there comes a point where you can't get it any tighter, and then you have to have a joke or you have to laugh, and that loosens it a little so that you can start screwing it down again and making things more and more tense. So I think it's just a natural part of horror for me.
Molt bé.
Then there is another element that I spot while reading you, which is that one can see a very a lot of respect for the intelligence of young readers. And then there is another element, which is that the point of view you adopt oftentimes contains a certain criticism towards adults. Like, the main character becomes an accidental hero and ends up adopting responsibilities that should be held by adults. Is it only me, or does this make sense to you?
Oh, no, it's not just you. I wrote part of it for that. When I was writing a lot of children's books and reading a lot of children's books, and of course, if you're a kid, you want to read about people like you saving the world, not 45-year-old businessmen saving the world. So it's very sort of normal to have the young heroes save the world, but at the same time, the more of these books I read, the more I would think things like, all of the adults in this book should be in jail because you should not be letting a 9-year-old go save the world. You should do it yourself because, and so I finally got around to, when I was writing the Wizard's Guide to Defensive Baking, I wanted to kind of point out that people were asking a lot of this heroine, and many adults were not behaving very well, like the monarch in the book is very weak and is not a bad person, but has no spine, and so a 12-year-old girl has to end up, saving the kingdom because she can't. And this is the sort of thing where, you should criticize the adults in power because that's terrible. And I think, too, more broadly, there is a tendency certainly in my generation, that we think, the kids will save us, the kids are great, and yes, the kids are great, and yes, they are doing great things, but they shouldn't have to be solving climate change and all of this. We should have done it or should be doing it right now. So that, I think, comes out in the book sometimes, to point out that if you're a kid, you should be able to expect adults to be adults and to take responsibility and not have to do it yourself. This all sounds very heavy. I promise you the book is hilarious.
Especially in A Wizard's Guide to Defensive Baking, there is a moment where the main character, Mona, criticizes the nobles, the other character, that she should have defended citizens, and it wasn't the case. And also in another of your books, poor children is sent to save the town from the drought, which is, of course, something that you were referring to, and this has really caught my attention, and I've loved this scene. So there's nature, plants, animals, who play a very important role in your literature also. I must confess that I will never again have the opportunity to, now I'm afraid of, wait a sec. I'm afraid of hares now, for example. So what is your relationship with nature? Because there's a lot of natural elements in your work. Sorry.
I love nature. If I was not a writer, I would want to go back and become a naturalist or a biologist. Nature is endlessly fascinating, and I'm a gardener. I go out, I spend a lot of time with plants and insects, and sometimes the insects bite me, but these things happen. So a lot of it comes out of art just because it's part of my world. So I assume that if a character is, walking into a place, they will notice what kind of trees there are and what kind of plants. And sometimes when I'm writing, I'm like, hang on, there's no reason this character would know what species all of these different plants in front of them are. I should probably, tone that down. Every character cannot also be a gardener. But just so many things are fascinating in nature. Like, bugs are endlessly cool, and they're, and they're very small, and people tend to overlook them. So when you learn things about them and you think, wow, if I made this 30 feet tall, it would be amazing. And then everyone would have to pay attention to it. With the hares and the rabbits, I confess, in multiple books now, I have had creepy rabbits, and I'm not quite sure why. I was never traumatized by a rabbit as a child or anything, but I think because we think of them as so harmless and pleasant creatures, and I am not sure if the animated movie of Watership Down was over here, but it was terrifying and had rabbit monsters and teeth and blood, and I watched that movie a lot as a child. So possibly that has something to do with it too. But just nature is awesome. I always want to write about it and be out in it and go around seeing new bits of it.
Parlant
Speaking about rabbits, your reference to Beatrice Potter, speaking about mycology and rabbits, there is a certain point where there is a reference to the illustrator Beatrix Potter, who in fact, as like one of the characters, was banned to be part of the mycology society, right, for being a woman. Here there's a national sports here in Catalonia, which is collecting fungus. Yeah, we love collecting fungus. This is what we do. Mushrooms, right? I mean, this is what we do. We build human towers and we pick mushrooms out in the forest. So while reading your book, I was fascinated by this parallel. So let's speak about the characters now. I'm totally in love with your characters. My dream is to party with them all together, all your characters together in a party. That would be my dream party. And your characters are not typical epical heroes. There is a certain... in your work, there's a certain praise to humble characters, to forgotten characters. There's a lot of attention, not only in main characters, but also in secondary characters. There is a lot of attention to your characters. How do you build them? How do you develop them? Are they inspired in someone you know? Do they just pop up? Do you feel identified with them from when you were a child? Where do these marvelous characters come from?
All kinds of places, and yes, I do tend to focus on the humble and the small, because I try to be fairly humble myself, and I am certainly not a princess or a king or anything like that. So I write about characters that I could understand, but they come from a lot of places. Sometimes there are elements of people that I've known, and if you are ever friends with a writer, they will steal parts of your personality to write in a book. You should just resign yourself now. If you're very lucky, it won't be obvious. Or if you're really, really lucky, they will do that. They will name the character after you, and then they will probably kill them off, because this is how authors show love. I have done that a couple of times, and I was like, but it's because I like you. I build them mostly. I think again, it's largely instinctive. It's like I will get to a point where there needs to be a character, and I just sort of reach out, and whatever falls, into my brain is what I put in. And sometimes I'm wrong, and I'll write a few paragraphs and be like, no, this is totally the wrong character. They should go away. But sometimes, I will have a character in the back of my head for a long time and not know where they go, and then I will start a book and I will be like, this is where they were supposed to be. In What Moves the Dead, the main character, Alex, had been in the back of my head for years, I think, and I had never known where to put them. And then I started this, and they just came charging, stampeding onto the page, and I was like, hang on, slow down, I'm trying to write this book. A lot of times this happens to me in the shower. I get all of my good ideas in the shower where there's no possible way to write them down. And I generally find once I can hear a character talking in my head, then I've got it right, because it's the dialogue is really the part that I love the most, and once I have that down, then everything gets a lot easier. If I can't hear how a character will talk, I usually have to keep working on it, or I don't have something right yet.
Molt bé.
Now let's speak about evil. I believe there are two types of evil in your work. The really bad ones, the really bad characters, like the prince, the ill-treater prince. And I like it because you do not justify him like, oh, poor thing, he had a horrible and terrible childhood. No, evil exists sometimes. So there are other normal, so to speak, characters who are not necessarily evil, but as a result of this lack of action, they become complice. Is this a topic that interests you? Complicity? Or the fact that some people do not fight back evil? What do you think about this?
What is the phrase? The only thing that is required for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. I think there's a lot of that. There are things that you should not accept. That if you see, if you don't get involved, then you are, if not responsible for the crime, you are guilty of letting it happen and go on in front of you. And the problem I think we get into is the very large things where we don't know how to not be complicit. And I can't hold that in my head, so I am not writing books about being complicit with capitalism, because I don't know where to like grab and pull. It's too large. But I can write books where people are complicit in not stopping evil that other people are doing, and those people are, if not actively malicious, it is also their fault. They are to blame for some of the terrible things happening. If you could stop it and you don't, then what are you even doing? So definitely that comes up. I do have a few evil characters that are just evil, and that's it. They're evil. Move along. I have also written books where I had characters that I thought were going to be evil, and about halfway through I had realized why they were doing something, and that they were not so much evil as misguided or blinded by their own prejudices, and they could either, if not be reformed, at least moved out of the way by people who knew what was going on. And those are hard sometimes to write, because sometimes it's a lot easier if the character is just evil, full stop, go stab him with a sword, everybody cheers. But you have to balance it, because if you try to reform every single evil character, like, the good characters would actually like to have some part in the story, please. They showed up for a reason, and it would be nice if they could have some time in the book. So yeah, it's a balancing act, I think.
Molt bé.
So in your work, oftentimes there's a certain smell to fairy tales also, or certain reference to fairy tales. And these fairy tales, did you read them, or do you still read them? Do they influence you? What do you like about them? What do you don't like about them?
Yeah, I've read lots and lots of fairy tales. I read a fair number growing up, as I think most of us do. We have these, fairy tale books, and most of them are very nice and for children and whatnot. And then I was out of college. I had a very boring job where I answered the phone if your street light had gone out. And I would say, okay, where is the street light? Okay, we'll dispatch a team. I would write it down. I would send an email, and then I would sit there by the phone for hours. And fortunately, I realized that this company was not monitoring my internet usage. And so I found myself reading fairy tales. There was a website, it's still up at the University of Pittsburgh, that is just this list of various fairy tales separated by type and by topic. And it is as primitive a website as exists in the world. This is Web 1.0. And I would just sit there and click it and read like 20 versions of Snow White, or 15 versions of The Frog Prince, and just sort of worked my way through that in between answering the phone. Yeah, okay, yes, where's the street light? Yeah, thank you. And it was a very strange job. Incidentally, you would not think that, you would think that would be normal people would call, but we would get people who were convinced that the streetlights were tracking them, or if they went out when they walked by, that the FBI was monitoring them. It was, it got interesting sometimes. But as a result, I had read all of these fairy tales and many versions of the same one, like one after another, and many of them were very dark and strange. And the Brothers Grimm, who collected a lot of them, people often say, that the Brothers Grimm toned down a lot of the violence and whatnot, and they did. But also, I have to say, they did a lot of editing to make things clearer and less rambling, because some of those fairy tales, you're like, wow, this needs an editor really badly. But they were fascinating. There are so many elements that come up that are so inherent to how people tell stories. Many of them show up in many, many different cultures. The same ideas come up over and over again. You keep winding up with the woman who marries someone who seems nice and turns out to be a monster, and sometimes he's a tiger, and sometimes he's a dragon, and sometimes he's the devil, and sometimes he's just a guy a serial killer. And but it's the same story fundamentally wherever you go. And so I was just fascinated by the connections and by the weird little details that make something to feel like a fairy tale. And also, let's face it, a lot of people in fairy tales act incredibly stupidly. I would read that, I would be like, a normal person would do this instead. It's a lot like the superhero thing. I was like, no, I would have done this differently. And so when I sit down and start writing stories that are based on fairy tales, I love the fairy tale, but often I'm thinking, a normal person would do this differently. They would they would be trying to work out all the rules of the palace they're trapped in with a beast and whatnot. They would be doing all sorts of things. And why in Beauty and the Beast in the Disney version, did Beauty never sit down with one of the talking silverware and just say, what is going on? And if there's magic preventing them from saying it, okay, can you do mime, charades? Can you write it down? So I start thinking things like that, and once I get sufficiently annoyed at a fairy tale, I go and write a version of it. So I have written a lot of novels out of spite.
Disney ha fet molt...
Disney has been extremely harmful. And more, Disney is introducing some censorship, right? There's censorship in our days in school libraries. But here also there's been a certain censorship in traditional stories because they've been considered inadequate for children because maybe they were too violent, or because maybe it was considered to reproduce gender stereotypes, right? So instead of putting them in context and picking the symbolic elements, which, as you say, are present in many different cultures. So yeah, indeed, you're right. So what else did you read as a child? You said you read fairy tales, and what else? And when you couldn't even read, what did your parents read to you? Or rather, what did you read also when you were a child?
Oh, goodness. I really liked books with talking animals in them. I read those, and we did not have so many when I was young. Now they have tons and tons, and in my day we had Watership Down, and we liked it. And it was uphill to the library both ways in the snow. So I loved the talking animal books. I loved C.S. Lewis's Narnia. I loved Ursula K. Le Guin's Earthsea books, which did not have talking animals, but just the world was so fascinating. And I read the second one, Tombs of Atman, I think 30 times, probably in a row. You know how kids are. And so lots of things like that. And I read a lot of Star Trek books. It was not the Next Generation because I'm old, but there were like 40 or 50 different Star Trek books, and I would see a new one was out and I would buy it, or my father also read them. He would buy one and then give it to me, and so I read a lot about Spock and Kirk, and I wanted to be a Vulcan when I grew up. Didn't work quite so well. One of my other favorite authors is Robin McKinley. She has not written too many books, but she had one about a princess who slew dragons, and it was this brilliant, sort of beautiful but sad sort of work about the princess who was not terribly good at things and not imaginative or anything, just brave and stubborn, and kept going. And I loved that book too. I checked it out so many times from the library that my name was the only name on the card, and eventually the librarian said that maybe other people might like to read that book.
Molt bé. Jo també era...
I was also a fan of Star Trek. You're not alone. I believe there are many here in the room. So, speaking about princesses, I don't know why I was thinking about Margaret Weiss, which makes me ask you, what books or authors have somehow inspired you, inspired your work, or you just enjoy reading? Recommend us some authors.
Let's see, inspired, again, Robin McKinley. I think a lot of the way I write now was heavily influenced by reading her so much when I was young. Terry Pratchett, of course. I keep losing my translator. Terry Pratchett is amazing, and just the humanity of and how much he loves people and how angry he is at injustice. And despite all of this, they're hilariously funny as well. And it's wonderful in the style and the realization that you can be angry about bad things and use that anger to accomplish things, and just wonderful characters. If you have not read Pratchett, you have an amazing treat in front of you. Let's see, who else did I read? A lot. I read all of the Pern books repeatedly, Anne McCaffrey, and these days I usually go back to Pratchett a lot, and McKinley, some romance novels. I have the problem that if I am writing in a genre, it is very hard for me to read in that genre. So if I am writing fantasy, I can't read fantasy. So I will read nonfiction or science fiction. And if I'm writing horror, I can't read horror, so I read romance. And so that it is as different as possible. Yes, I read a lot, and then all of my friends write books, and I buy them because they're my friends when they come out, and 2 or 3 years later I get around to actually reading them. But that's fine because they're the same way with me. So what we say to each other is, I have bought your book, and they say, that's great. I will never ask any follow-up questions. And
sometimes I've thought, while reading your work, I came up with some authors, like, oh, this makes me think of this or that. For example, the topic related to women's oppression. Your reference to women's oppression makes me think of Serafina, Rachel Harmon, I think, a Dragon's book, and sometimes when you were speaking about accidental heroes, I was thinking about Barbara Hambley winning the dragon. And yeah, Pratchett, of course, the sense of humor. I knew it. So,
Barbara Hambley is
Sí,
wonderful. Yeah.
sí, i tant.
and there's this daily terror that makes death move. Shirley Jackson. I keep thinking about different authors. Tell us a little bit more about topics or ideas you would like to explore in the future, if you can.
Oh,
M'agradaria escriure sobre això.
that I would like to explore.
No. Sí? Ho has sentit? No. Temes que
Topics you believe would be interesting exploring in the future. Like, I would like to read or to write, about this or that topic.
Oh goodness. I have a habit of reading nonfiction, and particularly about history, and I will get very fascinated in a topic and start reading about it, and about halfway through I'll be like, I have to write a book about this. So this is not so much the broad political topic, but I will read a book about the history of medieval sewer systems and be like, I gotta write a book set in a sewer. This is great. So yes, I still think a sewer would be fascinating. I don't quite know how I'll get a romance out of it, but you never know. I am endlessly fascinated by just weird historical facts and there was a book about the history of the salt trade that I read, and I think I wrote 2 books based around just the complexities of the salt trade and how now we've got salt all the time, so we don't care about it, but it was being shipped and everywhere, across the world, and I think Venice was an armed state that was going around and being like, you can sell us your salt for this price, or you can not have salt anymore. What's your choice? And I'm like, this is all amazing. I'm going to put this in a book. So there's just so many things I find fascinating. The history of artist pigments is amazing, and I wrote an entire book just because I was reading about the history of perfume and was like, oh, this is great. I gotta put some of these details in, and and you get castoreum from where on the beaver? Okay, yeah, great. We'll put that in the book. So that's a lot of things that I write about. I just get very interested in the practical details of things that are invisible to us now, because I don't think there's anyone out there still, milking beavers. There might be. It's a big world, but just now I think it's all made in labs, and so it's sort of invisible now. But you go back and you look at it and you're like, there was a time when one of your neighbors would probably have a pond full of beavers and be like, yeah, this is my job. So that's the sort of thing I like to write about. Just the things that I read about. I'm like, this is amazing.
Absolutely. Water channels, water depuration mechanisms are very present in this latest work.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Interessa el tema.
I was reading about water purification systems and was like, man, if you had magic, that would be one of the big things you'd want to do. Like the 2 great questions of civilization of any city are, where do we get our water and how do we get rid of our sewage? And if you have accidentally combined the 2, then you would probably love magic to fix that. So yeah, that's when I start thinking about magic and practical uses for it. Yes, it's very cool if you can throw fireballs around, but in practical terms, if you can purify water, you are probably a much more important person in the world.
Molt bé.
Now, for the readers who haven't met you or who haven't read you, I am sure it's not the case here in the room, which one would you recommend to start reading you, to get to know you?
I think Wizard's Guide to Divinity.
Wizard's Guide, no? Segurament, o què?
Yeah, it's
Guía de un mago para hornear en defensa propia. La guia d'un mag per a la brioixeria defensiva, em sembla que és el títol.
It's the one that is, for all ages, and it has pretty much everything you will find in one of my books. It has a practical heroine and weird, spectacular magic going on, and someone is being very sarcastic most of the time. And there's a weird little gingerbread creature that helps her. It's not gingerbread in every book, for the record. That would be weird. But yeah, I would think that's kind of the sort of archetypal T. Kingfisher book is Wizard's Guide. Also, I just liked writing it. It was fun.
Molt bé. Jo ara amb el...
I have a toddler. I can still not read your books to him. When you published this one, he was 6 years old, but in the cover, look what he drew. He loved it, and now we are reading Roald Dahl and Michael Ende, but then we'll move on to the guide. I don't know how we're doing time-wise, because I'm watchless. We're out of time, almost. So let's open the room. Let's make the most of this amazing opportunity we have. Here's a first question.
Hello, thank you for being here today. We love hearing you speaking. I have a very specific question about Nettle and Bone. I would like to know what's your favorite character or the favorite one to write, because you have a set of amazing characters there. And I hope it's the chicken, but please say whatever you want.
Okay, the chicken is pretty awesome. I really like Bone Dog just as a character if I would want to hang out with someone. But honestly, the character I relate most to in there is Agnes, because I too frequently feel that I am trying to do the right thing and I am slightly overwhelmed, and there is way too much work that I am not quite keeping on top of. So I relate to that a lot.
Hi, I just love your books.
Oh, thank
they
you.
saved me a lot from the COVID situation.
Oh, good.
And I just want to ask a really short question. When are you going to publish the 5th book of The Saint of Steel?
Oh, God. I'm hoping next year. I was hoping it would be this year, but then a lot happened. I've started it. It's going to be Marcus's book, and his wife will finally get a chance to beat him about the head and shoulders for many, many chapters. But it's probably next year, I hope.
Hi, thank you so much for coming here. I discovered you last summer with An Adult Bone, and my question is about the adventuring party, because most of the time when you read fantasy, you have these heroes that are larger than life, and the adventuring party in An Bone are basically two grandmas, and a woman who spent her whole life in a convent, and then a reluctant hero, I guess. So what was your inspiration to build this party, in a sense?
I didn't realize until I had already built it that it was sort of like an adventuring party. I was just, I had sort of planned for her, maybe for the Mara, the main character, to maybe meet up with the knight, Fenris. And instead, the Dustwife wanted to come along on the trip, and I was like, okay, okay, sure, we can work with that. And then they pick up the fairy godmother, and I'm like, yeah, okay, if I've already got one, what's two more? And so it kept going like that. And the thing is that since I love writing dialogue, when you have only one character, it's hard to write dialogue. If you have two characters, you can write dialogue, but it gets repetitive. So the more you add, the more dialogue you get until it completely spirals out of control. So and the reason it was two grandmas was because, let's face it, I think a large amount of work in the world gets done by little old ladies and nobody notices it's happening. So yeah, I just wanted to have that, to tap into some of that ability.
Hola.
Here, so before you spoke about Alex Siston, and I would like to ask you what brought you to say, listen, I need to write my own version of The Fall of the House.
What brought me to writing my own version of Fall of the House of Usher was I reread Fall of the House of Usher. I'd read a lot of Poe as a child. I had one of those hardcover books that well-meaning relatives get you when they don't know what else to get you, and that was the collected works of Edgar Allan Poe. So I had read all of that, but I hadn't read Fall of the House of Usher in 20 or 30 years, and so I went and reread it and thought, this is extremely short. In my head, it was a lot longer, and it looms so large in the cultural landscape. And then the next thing I thought was the narrator of this book is absolutely a useless person. All he does is scream and fall down, and like when everyone is fainting and coming back from being buried alive and they all pass, does it occur to him to drag anyone out of the house or to check for a pulse or anything? No, he screams, he runs out of the house, he falls down, the house falls down. I was like, this would be a very different story if there was someone competent here. And I had this character in the back of my head who was like, hello, I would like to volunteer for the position. And I'm like, all right, let's see what we can do. And yeah, that's... And after the book had been published and everything else, on a panel like this one, someone asked me, weren't you intimidated rewriting the work of someone as amazing and historic as Poe? And I was like, I wasn't until you said something about it. And now I suddenly realize that might have been incredibly arrogant of me.
Hello. Thank you for coming. And I've noticed something in quite some of your books, like Wizard's Guide, as well as I think Nettle Bone and Paladin's Grace. There is a recurring theme of weird or obscure niche saints and its related churches and convents, and I love it, but I'm just curious, where does that come from?
Well, I was raised Catholic. Probably a lot. It's very strange. I don't usually speak in so many Catholic countries where everyone else knows exactly what I'm talking about. So my grandmother was the sort of who got to church rarely, but kept saint medals pinned to her bra and had the saint cards in the mirror. And if you didn't have a St. Christopher medal in your car, what were you even doing? So I grew up largely very influenced by that, and so it just seemed natural that if you have a fantasy world, there are so many saints in the real world, there would of course be saints in a fantasy world as well, perhaps fantasy saints, and so I started making them up, and they were a lot of fun. Except that once or twice I have gotten emails from people saying, "Where can I learn more about this saint?" And I have to be like, "Oh, this is awkward." So.
Hi. Thank you for a wonderful afternoon. My question is about Thornhedge. I really love Toadling's Adopted Family, so I was also wondering how you came up with the idea.
Oh, Thornhedge is the main character is adopted by monsters called green teeth, which are river monsters that drown children, and it's very sweet when you read the book. I promise. Maybe not the drowning part so much, but they were sort of an obscure monster that I had seen, and I had never seen anyone do a sympathetic sort of treatment of them. And so I started thinking about what they would be like, and these creatures that are sort of mossy and sort of fishy, but are also people and live in streams. And so it just kind of went from that. I was just interested in them. I don't know where I ran across them at first, but they had always sort of stuck in the back of my head as an interesting sort of river monster. Also, I'm kind of scared of the water, and I don't swim well.
Hello, I would like to ask you, even if it has been raised before, there's been a question about the fall of a house. Well, you do an amazing work in retelling, and I would like to ask you, do you have in mind any other retelling, and if yes, which history about?
Oh, I don't know if I have any in my head right at the moment. I have actually written two others that have not been translated yet that will hopefully come out soon, which are the Twisted Ones, which is a retelling of Arthur Mation's The White People, and The Hollow Places, which is Algernon Blackwood's The Willows. And I love retellings. I often will read a lot of old pulp horror, and most of it is very bad because there was a real quantity over quality going on. But every now and then you will read one that just sticks with you, and if it stays in my head and if it scares me particularly, then I find myself, coming back to it and wanting to sort of take it apart and find what is scary in there and what we could do with it in a modern day setting. So, yeah, something like that. There are so many amazing things to retell. Honestly, I would really like to do a Little House on the Prairie, and it would come out really dark. But I had it all in my head. The paw is a werebear. It makes sense in the books because, they're always running into bears. I'm like, this will be great. It turns out the Laura Ingalls Wilder estate has no sense of humor. So it'll be a while.
Hi. You say you have a lot of fun writing, and I think every reader can see that through the book. And I just was wondering if you also get yourself scared with some scenes, because especially with What Moves the Dead, I was thinking like, whoa, is she scared about this? Because I'm quite terrified now.
It's kind of the opposite. If I am scared of something, I can write it. I think more genuinely, it comes out more authentic and is more likely to also scare people. Horror is very individual. Sometimes I have said horror writers we are afraid of everything, but if we write a book about it and other people get scared of it, then we're not the weirdos. So there is some of that, but I'm not actually that scared of mushrooms or rabbits. It was just all about the setting and whatnot. And sometimes if I can write about it, it gets out of my head and I'm not scared of it anymore, at least for a while. And it wears off. Like every time I write about what monsters under the bed, I get about 5 years, and then I'm scared to have my ankles hanging down again in case something grabs them. So, yeah. I don't know if that answered the question.
Molt bé.
I think we're going to have to call it a session. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ursula, for your visit and for your time. Thanks for coming. It's been an honor, a privilege, and a pleasure to interview you. And
you have done a wonderful job. Thank you.
No volia...
I didn't want to forget to say that you will be... Oh, apologies. Let me interrupt you. Because Wait a second. Thank you very much, Júlia. As you know, we're very good and very bad. We're good because we bring you amazing authors and we fill in rooms, but we are bad and we don't tell you to come on your bathing suit. We know it's super hot. We're going to be opening the windows. We're good because we are celebrating a party, and we're bad because we have sometimes bad news. Ursula, in 15 minutes is attending another panel with all the international authors. So it would be totally crazy to ask her to step out for 5-10 minutes and then back in. So the signatures will be after the last panel. So do not rush, because she'll go nowhere for the time being. It's the reasonable way to go around it, and we don't want to make her suffer.